It started with rain ticking against the windshield. That soft, uneven tapping that makes you feel less alone until you realize it's the only sound keeping you company. I'd been driving for hours. The kind of drive where the radio stays off and your thoughts keep circling the same quiet block. I was on my way back from a job interview that felt polite but empty, like shaking hands through glass. I didn't expect to stop anywhere. I didn't expect to see her name light up my phone. My aunt's voice sounded thinner than I remembered. Not fragile exactly, just stretched as if she'd been holding it together for too long. She said my name the way people do when they need something, but aren't ready to say what it is yet. Then she asked if I could stay the night. Just one night. She said, "The weather's bad. You're already so close." I remember glancing at the clock, doing the math in my head, telling myself this was normal. Family asks favors. Family opens spare bedrooms. Still, something in the way she paused before the question made my grip tighten on the steering wheel. I said yes anyway. I always say yes before I've really decided. Her house sat at the edge of a small town that felt forgotten on purpose. One main street, a diner with fog, windows, a gas station that smelled like burnt coffee. When I pulled into her driveway, the porch light was already on, casting a dull yellow circle onto the wet concrete. She must have been watching for me. She opened the door before I could knock. For a moment, we just stood there, the space between us holding years we'd never really talked about. She looked different than I'd built her up in my head. Smaller maybe, or quieter. Her smile came late, like it had to travel a long way to reach her face. "You must be exhausted," she said, stepping aside to let me in. The house was warm in that closed-up way, scented with old wood and something floral. I couldn't place lamps instead of overhead lights, curtains half drawn, as if the outside world were something to keep at a distance. She took my jacket and hung it carefully, smoothing the sleeve longer than necessary. I followed her into the kitchen. She'd already made soup, still steaming on the stove. It felt rehearsed, like she'd planned for me before she'd even called. We sat at the small table by the window, rain streaking down the glass beside us. She asked about the interview, nodded at the right moments, but her eyes drifted, never staying on my face for long. "You can take the guest room," she said, eventually. Or she hesitated. "The couch pulls out, too, if that's easier." "Either's fine," I told her. I meant it. I didn't yet know why the choice seemed to matter. After dinner, the house grew quieter, as if it were settling into itself. She poured us each a drink, just a finger of whiskey, and we sat in the living room without turning on the TV. The clock on the wall ticked loud enough to feel like a reminder. She crossed and uncrossed her legs, then pulled a blanket over her lap. Even though the room wasn't cold, I didn't expect to talk much, but she asked me questions that didn't have neat answers. If I was lonely, if I ever felt like time had sped up without asking. She didn't share much in return, only small pieces. How quiet the house felt these days, how nights seemed longer than they used to. At one point, she laughed softly and said, "It's nice having someone here again." Her hand rested on the arm of the chair between us, not touching me, just close enough that I noticed the space where it could. When I finally stood to say I should get some sleep, she looked relieved and disappointed at the same time. The hallway felt narrow as she showed me where the bathroom was, where the light switch stuck. She lingered in the doorway of the guest room, her hand on the frame. "You don't have to rush off in the morning," she said. "Stay as long as you need." I lay awake after she left, listening to the house breathe around me, pipes knocking, floorboards settling somewhere down the hall, her door closing softly. I stared at the ceiling and tried to name the feeling sitting in my chest. Gratitude maybe, or something heavier, something that hadn't told me its name yet. I didn't realize then that the invitation hadn't really been about the weather or the spare bed or even the night itself. I only knew that lying there in the dark, I felt like I'd stepped into the middle of a sentence that had started long before I arrived. I woke before dawn, the house still holding its breath. That gray hour where everything feels unfinished. For a moment, I didn't remember where I was. Then I heard the rain again, softer now, and the faint hum of the refrigerator down the hall. Her house. My aunt's house. The words settled awkwardly in my mind, like furniture pushed into the wrong room. I lay there longer than I needed to, listening. There were footsteps at one point, slow, careful, a cabinet opening, then closing, water running. The quiet rituals of someone who didn't expect to be watched. I wondered if she was thinking about me, too, or if I was already fading back into the category of guest, of obligation fulfilled. When I finally came out of the room, she was standing at the stove, still in her robe, hair pinned up loosely as if she'd done it without a mirror. She turned when she heard me and smiled. That same delayed smile, like she was checking her footing before stepping forward. "Coffee is ready," she said. "I didn't want to wake you." "You didn't," I told her, though it wasn't exactly true. We sat at the kitchen table again, steam curling up between us. Morning light crept through the blinds, catching dust in the air. She wrapped both hands around her mug, but didn't drink right away. Her eyes kept drifting toward the window, then back to me, never quite landing. "Did you sleep okay?" she asked. I nodded. Better than I expected. That made her laugh softly, then stop as if she meant to react at all. She asked about my plans for the day, whether I was driving straight back or stopping somewhere. I said I wasn't sure. The answer seemed to please her more than it should have. She stood to get more coffee, brushing past me in the narrow space. Her sleeve grazed my arm. It was nothing. It felt like too much. "You don't have to rush," she said again, this time without looking at me. "It's nice having the house," interrupted. The word hung there. I wondered what she'd almost said instead. Later, she asked if I wanted to help her with something in the garage. Just moving a few boxes. I followed her outside. The air damp and cold, the sky still undecided. The garage smelled like old paper and oil. She moved with purpose, lifting boxes she probably shouldn't have been lifting alone. I took them from her without comment. "These have been sitting here for years," she said. "Things I meant to go through, things I didn't." She opened one and pulled out photographs, old ones. Her younger smiling to wide faces I barely recognized. She handed one to me and watched my reaction carefully, as if my expression might tell her something important. "You don't remember that summer, do you?" she asked. I shook my head. I was too young. She nodded. "That figures. Some things only exist if two people remember them." We stood closer than necessary, both looking down at the same image. I could feel her presence beside me, solid, real. She smelled like coffee and something clean. When she looked up at me, her expression shifted just slightly, like she'd caught herself thinking something she hadn't meant to think. She closed the box abruptly. "That can wait," she said. "Come inside. It's cold." Back in the house, time stretched strangely. She put music on low, something old and unfamiliar. We didn't talk much after that. Silence settled between us, not uncomfortable, but waited. I caught her watching me more than once when she thought I wasn't looking. Each time she looked away too late. Around noon, I reached for my jacket. The movement felt loud, final. "You sure?" she asked. Her voice was even, but her hands tightened around the dish towel she was holding. "Yeah, I should get back." She nodded once, then again. She walked me to the door, standing closer than she had the night before. For a second, neither of us moved. The space between us felt charged, like something unsaid was pressing outward, looking for air. "Take care of yourself," she said. "You, too." She hesitated, then touched my arm lightly, not to stop me, just to make contact. Her hand lingered a beat longer than it needed to, then fell away. As I stepped outside, the rain started again, sudden and sharp. I didn't turn back, but I felt her there, watching from the doorway until I reached the car. When I drove away, the house disappeared quickly in the rearview mirror. Too quickly. I told myself it had been nothing, just a night, just a visit. But the quiet stayed with me, clinging like the smell of rain on clothes long after you've come inside. And somewhere beneath that calm, a question had taken root. When I didn't yet know how to ask, but couldn't stop hearing. I told myself the feeling would fade once distance did its work. Miles usually smooth things out, turn moments into something manageable. But the farther I drove, the more that house seemed to travel with me, settling somewhere behind my ribs. I caught myself checking my phone at red lights, half expecting a message that didn't come. Days passed, then a week. Life resumed its familiar thin routines. I went back to interviews, back to evenings where the apartment felt too large for one person. Still, small things pulled me back to her. Coffee steaming in the morning, the sound of rain starting suddenly at night. I'd think of the way she stood in doorways, as if unsure whether to enter or leave. Her call came on a Wednesday evening. I was washing a single plate, the water running longer than necessary. Seeing her name again felt like pressure against a bruise. "I didn't mean to bother you," she said. "I just realized you left your scarf here." I pictured it immediately draped over the back of the chair in the guest room. I hadn't even noticed it was gone. "You can mail it," I said. There was a pause long enough that I heard her breathe in. "Or you could come get it," she said. "If you're not busy." I was busy. I wasn't busy. I said I'd drive down that weekend. When I arrived, the rain was gone. The sky looked scrubbed clean, too open. She met me at the door again. But this time she didn't smile right away. She stepped back, letting me pass, her hand brushing my shoulder as she did. The house felt different in daylight. Less sheltering, more exposed. Still quiet, still careful. "I won't keep you long," she said. "I know you. Probably have plans." I didn't answer. She handed me the scarf neatly folded as if it were something fragile. Our fingers touched briefly, then separated. The contact echoed longer than it should have. We sat in the living room, neither of us suggesting coffee. Conversation stayed close to the surface at first. Weather, work, nothing that could break. But silence kept pressing in around the edges, patient. "I've been thinking," she said finally, staring at her hands. "About that night dot, so had I." I said nothing. "I hope I didn't make you uncomfortable," she went on. "I don't always realize when I ask too much of people." Her words felt heavier than she intended. I shifted in my seat, unsure where to put my hands, my eyes. "You didn't," I said. "Not exactly." She looked up then. Really looked at me like she was searching for something I hadn't named. For a moment, neither of us moved. The clock ticked. A car passed outside. "I'm glad you came back," she said quietly. The sentence sat between us, unfinished. I wondered if she was too. I stood a few minutes later, saying I should go before it got dark. She walked me to the door again. This time, when she reached out, her hand didn't stop at my arm. It rested there, steady, not pulling, not pushing, just there. "Be careful. Driving," she said. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. As I stepped outside, I felt the familiar tightening in my chest. Not fear exactly, but the sense that something fragile was being tested. I didn't know what either of us wanted. I only knew that leaving felt like abandoning a conversation that hadn't finished forming. I drove away slower this time, and for the first time, I wondered if staying away was really the safer choice, or just the easier one. The third time she called, she didn't invent a reason. Her voice was steadier than before, almost careful, like she'd rehearsed what she was going to say and then decided not to use the script. She asked if I could come down again, just for dinner. She said the words plainly, without apology, without explanation. I said yes before thinking it through. Again. The drive felt different this time. No rain. No excuse. The road stretched clean and bright, every mile feeling like a choice I was actively making instead of something happening to me. I kept waiting for a sense of alarm to kick in for the part of me that knew better to grab the wheel. It never did. She had candles lit when I arrived. Not many, just enough to soften the corners of the room. She hugged me. Hello. Brief, but firmer than before, her cheek brushing mine. I caught the faint scent of soap and something warmer beneath it. It stayed with me as I followed her inside. Dinner was simple. Pasta, salad, bread torn by hand instead of cut. We sat closer at the table than we needed to. Our knees brushed once, then again. Neither of us moved away. We talked, but not about anything that mattered. Movies she'd watched. A neighborhood moved away. The sound of the clock grew louder as the night went on, like it was trying to remind us of something. I noticed she barely ate. I noticed the way her eyes kept returning to me, then dropping at the last second. After we cleared the dishes, she poured wine. When she handed me my glass, her fingers closed around mine for just a moment. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a demand either. It felt like a question asked without words. We sat in the living room again. The same chairs, the same quiet, only this time the silence didn't wait politely. Preston, I don't do this very well, she said suddenly. Do what? I asked. She smiled faintly, then shook her head. Say things before it's too late. The air shifted. I could feel it in my chest, like a door opening somewhere I hadn't planned to go. I stayed still, afraid that any movement might decide something for us. I know this isn't simple, she continued, and I know what it looks like. But I also know how lonely it gets when you keep everything folded neatly away. I've done that my whole life. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with being seen. It was being recognized. The fear of it sat heavy in my stomach. You don't have to say anything, she added quickly. I just needed you to know that asking you to stay, it wasn't an accident. I nodded. It felt like the only honest response I had. My hands rested on my knees, clenched tight. I could hear my own breathing. She stood and walked to the window, staring out into the dark. The house seemed to shrink around us as if the walls were listening.